daughter very well, and though sometimes she might have sighed because Miriam did not revel in pretty things, she was proud of her daughter's intelligence and willingness to learn almost anything, and said so, much to the exasperation of the governess. Sir Geneva was the king's best friend. He and the king were together nearly every day, since the manor was close enough to the palace to ride there in an hour, and sometimes the king came to visit, quietly. When he did, it was without his crown, and he would stand on no ceremony, even descending to play silly games that had everyone laughing hysterically, except Belinda the governess, who was scandalized. "You have a treasure in your keeping, and that is your family, Jen," he'd say as he slipped back to the palace. "Never lose it." And everything was wonderful, until the terrible day when war came to Tirendell, and the king's champion rode off to command the army in the king's name, and never came home again. With his death, Sir Geneva brought victory, but that wasn't much consolation for Lady Alethia, even though the king made her a court princess and did his best to make sure she and her daughter would never want for anything. In retrospect, I think Mamma and I were too caught up in our grief to notice for a long time just how very attentive the king was, but it certainly didn't escape the notice of most of the court. People began paying a lot more attention to us, and people who wouldn't have paid much heed to the widow of a mere knight with only the land of the manor garden, even if her former husband had been the king's champion, started hanging about, manoeuvring to get themselves into an advantageous position with us. I'll admit I thought it was because of Mamma's new title. I was only 13, and I had no idea that a court princess had no real position, and that all the title did was confer nobility on her line. For a while, Mamma was oblivious too. I stayed oblivious to the fact that she seemed to be feeling better, and that I didn't have to work so hard at keeping her spirits up every time something reminded her of father. So that meant I didn't have to keep bottling things myself, though I'd never let Mamma or Belinda see it. Of course, conferring nobility on Mamma was the whole point of making her something other than a simple knight's daughter and knight's widow, because exactly a year and a day later, during the anniversary of our victory, King Carlson proposed to Mamma. On the state balcony, in front of everyone. It was ridiculously romantic. It was also carefully staged, so not a single one of his councillors got a chance to object or suggest someone that would bring Tirendell political advantage. In fact, by the time they all realised what he was about to do, it was too late to do anything about it. There was a very long speech about how he had loved Mamma for years, but she had chosen his best friend, and he was determined not to destroy their happiness by being selfish. But now that she was free, would she consider him? And he knew he could never replace Geneva, but would she? Well, he never got a chance to finish the speech, because Mamma got this expression of wonder on her face, and maybe a little relief, and just a flash of grief, and then all that turned into the most radiant joy I've ever seen anyone display, and she fell into his arms, and it was all like the ending of a fairy tale. Except, of course, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And where my story properly begins. Chapter 1. I had just stolen a moment away from the dressmakers and my fitting to check on my sister. With sun streaming in through the window of the royal nursery, I stared down into the cradle at the face of my baby sister.